Cue the overused sound of slurping coffee. What's up, everybody? Peter McKinnon here, and today, wait, I'm not Peter McKinnon. Today, we're gonna take a look at Peter McKinnon's new video about motion blur. So one of my buddies, Peter McKinnon, well, when you watch as much YouTube as I watch, you start thinking that these people are your friends, and it's kind of creepy, but I spend so much time with them more than I spend with my actual friends, so it kind of makes sense. This guy, Peter McKinnon, he's amazing. You've probably heard of him. He made a video about how to use motion blur in your videos and how to use it when you're doing slow motion so it looks more natural and your transitions look better. The video is called Motion Blur Ramping, and that's hopefully what this video is called because, you know, gotta beat the YouTube algorithm somehow. So he went through the process of taking your slow motion footage and adding some directional blur in Premiere Pro to make it look more like it has motion blur, and everybody's used to seeing motion blur in videos that are fast. But when you speed up slow motion video, it kind of looks weird because there really isn't any motion blur that should be there. So he took the directional blur effect, put it over top of the footage, and keyframed it to make it look like motion blur. Now, in no way am I saying that this is wrong and that he did it the wrong way and that it looks like crap. It actually looks pretty good. However, I've been using a different method for literally the past like 10 years, ever since I was in the world of editing Call of Duty videos. I really think it looks a lot more natural. It's not as quick, you're gonna have to use After Effects, but if you really want to simulate motion blur in your videos and make it look real, this is the method that you should use, and I really highly suggest it. No shade to Peter McKinnon at all. I think he's a great guy. He has 1.7 million more subscribers than I do, so I can't really throw shade at him. But the method that he found is just different than what I've been using for the past 10 years or so. And I really wanted to share that with you guys because I've been getting great results. So let's jump on over to Premiere Pro and get this started. Okay, so here we are in Premiere, and I just set up a few clips right here, just random clips from this video. So like I said, this process is actually gonna take a little bit longer than if we were to just do it in Premiere and use directional blur. There's two reasons for this. One, we have to go into After Effects. And two, we have to do all of the speed ramping in After Effects. The really great thing about Adobe is that there's something called dynamic link. That means that you can open a project from one program into another program seamlessly. Now in Premiere Pro, when you're speed ramping with time remapping, for some reason it doesn't carry over to After Effects. The keyframes do, but the speed ramping doesn't. So this kind of sucks, but it doesn't take that much longer to do it in After Effects, and I'm gonna show you how to do that right now. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this timeline right here. We're gonna go to the spot where we wanna cut our clip, and I'm gonna actually just fix this real quick. So go to the spot where we want to cut to our B-roll and do the speed ramping. Now we're going to cut the audio exactly where we want our B-roll to start. Now we're going to right click on that exact point and do mark in. Then we're going to go to the end of the audio, right click and choose mark out. We're going to export this audio so that we know exactly where our clips are going to start, and we can bring that into After Effects and sync them properly. Now you're just going to export this as an MP3, and the reason being because the quality of this audio does not matter at all. We're going to bring our clips back into Premiere and use the raw audio that we have in here. I did not mean to rhyme there, I'm sorry. Basically, we're bringing the audio into After Effects just to sync it up, just so that we have a reference as to when we're going to show our clips. So just export this to your desktop. It doesn't even matter, you're not even going to save this. So once you've done that, just open up After Effects. We're not going to dynamic link, we're just going to open it as its own program. So it's not going to bring anything in from Premiere. We're going to do this all manually, and then we're going to bring it back into Premiere once we're done. Now this is somewhat of a long process, but in the end, you're going to get better results. And again, by no means am I throwing shade at Peter. I think his method looks great, honestly, but this is the method that I use. If you're just throwing a quick vlog together, go ahead and use directional blur. But if you're working on a larger scale project, you're going to want to go and do the work and put in the time and effort to make your clips look as good as they can. So here's After Effects. We're going to choose new composition, and we're going to make sure that our width and height are the same as what we have in Premiere, and our frame rate is the same. The duration doesn't really matter. So now we're going to bring our clips in, and also remember to import the audio that we just exported from Premiere. So drag our audio down to the timeline. If you want, you can go to the end here and click N, and that'll bring the work area over to the end of this audio. Right click and choose trim comp to work area. So now we're going to start working on our speed ramping. And this is actually pretty simple. It's different than in Premiere. The process is a tiny bit longer, but I'm going to show you how to do this right now. Now click on your clip and choose Alt open bracket. That's going to cut it exactly where your playhead is, and go all the way to the beginning with your playhead. Now we're going to click on our clip, right click and choose time, enable time remapping. So here's what we're gonna do. Click on this little diamond right here. That's gonna make a keyframe exactly where you put it. Now choose your audio and hit L twice. That's gonna bring up the waveform for your audio. Find the nearest beat or whatever beat you want your clip to speed ramp out of. I'm gonna choose this beat right here. And now on your numpad, hit the star. That's gonna add a little marker right above it. So now come back to the beginning, and you usually want your speed ramp to last 10 to 12, maybe 15 frames. So now we're gonna hold Control, Shift, and press right on the arrow key. This is gonna bring us exactly 10 frames ahead. Then you can hold Control and do maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you're 14 frames ahead. That's usually around where you wanna stay, maybe 10 to 15 frames for the speed ramp. Now we're gonna hit this little diamond right here and make another keyframe. We're gonna use this timestamp again and go ahead to where we want our slow motion to start happening. Now we're gonna go to this marker over here and click here again. We're gonna make another keyframe and then go 10 frames backwards. So Control, Shift, and to the left. Now we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, I guess. That's fine. And choose this diamond again, and we're gonna make another keyframe. Now we're gonna go back to this last one, and we're gonna choose a nice spot for it to ramp out. I like that spot right there. So now we're gonna highlight these diamonds and come up here to this little tab right here. This is the graph editor, and I'll show you what that does in a second. Click on this tab and it'll bring you to something that should look like this. Now all we're gonna do is zoom into these little boxes here. Go to this one furthest to the left and click on one of the squares. You'll see these yellow squares with these lines and the circle show up. Grab this one on the right and bring it all the way as far as you can to the left and drag it down until it locks to the bottom square. Now take this little circle over here and pull it all the way back. Now we're gonna do the exact same thing on this side, except the inverse. So take the one that's farthest to the left, drag it all the way, pull it down until it locks to the square at the bottom, and come to this little circle right here and pull this one all the way to the right. And now we've made a ramp, which it's a speed ramp. That's where it gets the name. It's speed ramping. It looks like a half pipe that a skater would skate on. Shout out at John Hill. So now we're gonna click this little box again, and now our keyframes are gonna look like this. Make sure your playhead is over top of the last keyframe and hit Alt and bracket. That's gonna end our clip right there. So now if we play this back, we can see that it does a speed ramp. So that's part one. The second part of this is adding the motion blur. As you can probably tell, it looks good, but it doesn't really look natural. So all we have to do is come up to this little tab right here and type in CC space force, and then CC force motion blur should show up, and just drag that onto your clip. Now you'll see immediately it'll move and it'll make it look like it has motion blur on it. If we turn that off and on, you can kind of see what it's doing there. Effectively, what this is doing is duplicating your layer and shifting it to the side slightly, and then adding some blur on top of that. It's doing a lot more than just adding streaky lines to it. And if we play that back, you can see. So as you can probably tell, it's added a nice subtle motion blur to it. So if we go up to these effects over here, I'll explain what those do. Motion blur samples is essentially how many times it chops up your clip and duplicates it and moves it slightly to the left or to the right, depending on what way your motion blur faces. So if I put this at 2, for example, you can actually see the duplication of the frame. So the higher the number this is, the better it's gonna look. I'm gonna leave it at 8. Bear in mind, the quality is gonna go up, but your render time is also going to go down. It's going to be heavier on the processor if you add more motion blur samples, because it's effectively copying more and more layers, and overall it's going to be pretty heavy on your processor. Now shutter angle is literally shutter speed. If you guys know what shutter speed is, you'll know that the higher it is, the less motion blur you have, and the lower it is, the more motion blur you have. Except shutter angle is the exact opposite. The higher the shutter angle is, the more motion blur you're going to have, and vice versa. So if we set this to 360, you'll see it's going to blur even more. See right there. I personally like this, but the duplications start showing a little bit more, so maybe we should raise the motion blur samples. And you can see once we do that, it looks a little bit more natural, but again, it's going to be harder on your processor. Override shutter angle and native motion blur you don't really need to worry about. Just make sure that override shutter angle is checked and native motion blur is off. So basically the default settings. So as you can tell, this adds a nice subtle motion blur to your images. I'll play this clip without motion blur, and now with motion blur. And you can tell there's a huge difference between the two. Now I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth with the speed ramping. Now, one last thing real quick, if you want your clips to be in slow motion, all you have to do is choose your clip, right click, interpret footage, main, and then under frame rate, conform to frame rate, type in 24, because that's what our frame rate of our timeline is, and click OK. And that's gonna set it to slow motion. So what I've done here is I've just added another clip into the timeline and speed ramped it and added some CC Force motion blur, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. So as you can see, it looks really great. 2 clips transitioning one to the other with realistic looking motion blur, as if you actually took the camera and whipped it in real life, kind of like how we're emulating in this clip. So all you have to do is click File, Save As, and save a copy of it. Come back into Premiere Pro. Now we're gonna import the actual project file. So find the After Effects file that you just saved and import that. It's gonna bring up a box that says composition, and you're gonna choose the composition that you just made in After Effects and just created that speed ramping and added those effects to. That's the actual composition that you just made. Double click it, import it, and here it is, it's right here. It should be synced up. Just double click on that, grab right here, and place it right where that little playhead is. So now I'll show you what that looks like. It should be synced perfectly to the audio. So there you go, you just learned how to speed ramp in After Effects and add some really great looking motion blur. And because that effect isn't too processor heavy, you should be able to bring it right into Premiere and watch it in real time. Even though there's this little red bar over top of it, you should be able to watch that in real time without having to render it unless you have a slower computer. Sometimes you can't watch them in real time, they're too processor heavy, but with this one you should be able to jump right in and just slap it into your timeline and watch it immediately. So there you go, that's how you do it. So I hope you guys learned something from this video. In no way am I throwing shade at Peter McKinnon. Again, I love the guy. I watch all of his videos. I think he's fantastic. I'm not saying his method's wrong. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use his method. If that's what you like, if you think it looks good, then go ahead. I think it looks good. But this is the method that I use, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. So please don't attack me, please. If you liked this video, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't, leave a comment down below and tell me why. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about it. I want your feedback. I want to hear what you guys have to say. I want to know how I can make better videos for you. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, but that's going to do it for this one. So I'll see you guys in the next. What's up, everybody? Peter McKinnon here.